Hi, I'm Dan McLellan. I live in District 6 in San Diego, and if you do too, consider this to be a friendly knock on the door, encouraging you to vote for Tommy Hough to be our next City Council representative. I'm born and raised in San Diego, so like you, I care passionately about the future of our great city. I'm also a nonpartisan who have voted both Republican and Democrat in local elections. In the past, I have voted for Dick Murphy and Jerry Sanders, who I think are two Republicans who did a phenomenal job as mayor. But I am not voting for Cate to return to our city council seat. And there are several reasons why. So if you give me a few minutes, I would like to explain them. Primarily, Cate has had his chance as a first-time politician, and he has miserably failed. In the 4 years that Cate has held office, he has pushed large business away from San Diego. He is behind policies that would restrict our access to the Bay. He has raised our water rates, which has dug into our pocketbooks. He has admittedly illegally leaked documents in support of a special interest group. And he's had a spokesperson in Tony Hough, who has an arrest history for domestic violence and vandalism. Which means if you live in District 6, through Cate, you have had a spokesperson who has an arrest history for domestic violence and vandalism. I don't think that's an appropriate person speaking on our behalf here in District 6. Let me get into explaining exactly all the background behind what I just said to give it a little bit of depth. And there's an interconnectivity amongst everything. And in large part, it goes back to Cate's alignment with one particular special interest group here in San Diego, and that's the hoteliers. 2 years ago, I was on the campaign trail with Cate, sitting on different sides of an issue, trying to keep the charges in San Diego. I was supportive of Measure C. While going out and debating Cate, I saw him debate not just me against Measure C, but he also debated against Measure D. Two measures that would have both kept the chargers in San Diego and expanded our convention center. The first measure that came was actually Measure D, and it said that the chargers would have to pay 100% of their cost for a stadium. It provided a space for a non-contiguous expansion of the convention center and a funding mechanism for that in downtown. And it allowed for the land that was in Mission Valley to be developed for educational purposes, very similar to what SDSU West is proposing today. The chargers were actually behind Measure D, but they did have some concerns because there was a kill pill in the measure which said if anything was illegal, that it all was illegal, which they felt would have brought a lot of litigation towards Measure D. So the chargers came up with their own measure, Measure C, which would have provided, again, a non-contiguous expansion of the convention center and combine it with a stadium, which would have saved money for both construction costs, because there are areas of those two facilities that would be shared. And they were asking for $100 million to go towards the stadium costs, and really the rest was going towards the convention costs, and the chargers were willing to pay for cost overrides. Cate campaigned against both of those on behalf of the hoteliers. And there were a couple of reasons why, and when he went out and argued for it. One is he said that we couldn't afford a 3% hike to the TOT. We now know that that is laughable because the hoteliers have now just come out with their own measure to expand the convention center contiguously with a 3% hike. Fortunately, San Diego voters were wise to this, and not enough of them signed it, so it didn't even make the ballot. So after losing the chargers for fighting for a non-contiguous, against a non-contiguous expansion, the people behind that couldn't even get their own measure on the ballot for us to vote on here in 2018. And in the process, cost San Diego taxpayers millions and millions of dollars in trying to acquire and losing land that were needed for that expansion. The other reason why Cate said that he was against a Measure C or Measure D is he felt that joining a stadium and a convention center was too hard for hoteliers to book their conventions out in advance, because typically they'd book out for 15 or 20 years in advance. I want you to think about what Chris Cate is really saying there. He's saying that in San Diego, we want to keep our convention doors closed to businesses who aren't at least 15 to 20 years old, because you need to be that age to book out a convention in order to come to San Diego. That is a ludicrously poor plan for the future of San Diego. Think of who we are as a city and business-wise with our Qualcomms and our technology here. A lot of the great technologies that are reshaping the world that we live in, those companies aren't 15 to 20 years old. We need to have a convention business in San Diego that invites those new companies to San Diego. And while you're here, take a look at what we have. Put down some roots. Maybe do some manufacturing here and hire jobs. Stay in San Diego, not just a couple weeks, but long term, because we have a lot to offer. But with Chris Cate's vision, you can't do that. He doesn't want to have any new businesses come to San Diego. He wants just old businesses to come to San Diego for convention space. And that doesn't make sense. So what was this really about? Why was Cate against C and why was he against D? Well, it's because the mayor and the hoteliers really wanted to have a contiguous expansion of the convention center, which simply means they wanted it connected to the current facility. There's a problem with that, and that is that we have, as citizens, an inheritable right to have access to the Bay. It has been left to us in perpetuity. It is a right. Well, a contiguous expansion of the convention center walls off and blocks our access to the Bay. And we're seeing further efforts by the hoteliers here in San Diego with a planned expansion of the Bahia, which would take away parking and again wall off and limit our public access to the Bay. But Chris Cate isn't standing up and supporting our right to access the Bay. And as a San Diego resident who's enjoyed the Bay, and I have 2 small children, that's something that's very important to me, and I hope it's important to you. The other thing that was going behind here, as C and D were being debated, it turns out the mayor were meeting with SoccerCity about development of Mission Valley. So they didn't want to keep the Chargers in San Diego at all. They wanted them out of here so that their development friends could get a hold of that land to develop as they saw fit. And Chris Cate was in on it. He illegally leaked documents and admitted to it to support the SoccerCity measure. So not only did Chris Cate help push the Chargers away from San Diego by not supporting either measure that would have kept them here, he illegally leaked documents for the group that wanted to come in and take the land in which the Chargers were occupying there in Mission Valley. Really, it's disgraceful when you think about it. Another thing that's disgraceful is what's happened with our homeless issue in San Diego. We've had a huge hepatitis outbreak here, and that is very problematic as a tourist destination city, and it's problematic for humanitarian purposes. People lost their lives. And Chris Cate, as a city council member and the mayor, just did not act quickly enough to be able to stop that. Well, Tommy Hough has made deal with the homeless issue one of his primary concerns, and I really applaud Tommy for that. I know that it's a very complex issue that isn't going to be solved overnight, if ever solved, but it's something that we cannot ignore, because if we continue to have a huge homeless problem here in San Diego, it's going to detour tourism, which is going to kill jobs. We need to deal with this issue in a way that makes sense and that is good for our economy, and I believe that Tommy Hough will do that. So that's one of the reasons why I'm supporting Tommy Hough. Chris Cate has also raised our water rates multiple times. I've seen it in my water bill. I bet you've seen it in yours. And you may not know this, but there was another solution to help provide extra money to the water district, in which the city has failed to act on since 2005. The city actually doesn't own all the land in Mission Valley where the stadium sits. 80 of that acres is actually owned by the water district. And in 2005, the city stopped compensating the water district for their land in Mission Valley because they said it was valueless. Jan Goldsmith, our previous city attorney, said that's illegal. It's highly illegal. If the city were to fairly compensate the water district for the land in which they own in Mission Valley, then there'd be certainly less of a need for them to raise the water rates, which take money directly out of your own pocket. In the end, Cate has driven business from San Diego, doesn't have a good vision to bring business to San Diego, has raised our water rates, which has taken money out of our pocket, illegally leaked documents, had a spokesperson who was arrested for domestic violence and vandalism, and is running on the false claim that he fixed all of our streets. The answer is clear. Somebody like that doesn't deserve your vote to be reelected, no matter what party you're with. That guy is a representative of the swamp. That's why I encourage you to vote for Tommy Hough on November 6th to be our next city council member.